So we have a test coming up, and I know there was apprehension before spring break about the test, and I would imagine there's probably increased apprehension post spring break and with us being in a different format. So I'm making this video, and I'm going to walk through chapters 4, 5, and 6, and you're going to see green highlight. So I would start and stop this video to be able to highlight and hear the information that you need to know for our test 2. I'll be sending you more details on what that's going to look like. It will be a Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It will be at your home. I will let you know more details on that, but I'm trying to send you information in chunks, trying not to overwhelm either one of us. But looking here, I am at chapter 4, and there's no green on this page. But as soon as we get to page 194, I would have highlighters out. I would have, if you want to do flashcards where we go through this, whatever you want to do to maximize this video, you can replay it. All sorts of pieces of information and things that you can do with this, but just maximize this video to help you get ready for our test. So on page 194, you're going to see that probability is highlighted. It is very important that you know the vocabulary of what's going on. And how much you know or how much you want to memorize is up to you. You're going to be seeing inside my book and what I had underlined, but do you have an idea of what probability is? Do you also have an idea of what a probability experiment, an outcome, and a sample space, what all of these are? It seems like years ago when we talked about these in class. So take time to put maybe probability experiment on a flashcard, outcome on a flashcard, sample space, to reacquaint yourself with what these are, as well as go back and look at your notes. So I'll be talking to you about vocabulary, but I'll also show you some examples you should be familiar with as you study for our test. Page 195, I have highlighted example 4.1. Find the sample space for rolling two dice. And so as you see this, it's going to give you examples, information. I'll let you figure that out, look at it, go back and look at your notes. The big thing about this video is just narrowing down the bulk of the material in 4, 5, and 6 down to just these highlighted green spaces. And on page 195, I'm looking at example 4.2. Can you find the sample space for drawing one card? I'm on page 196. It is important that you know what a tree diagram is and how to use one. It's also important at the bottom of that page to know what an event is. At the top of 197, I highlighted some more words, like what is a simple event, a compound event. And then we end up with the 3 basic interpretations of probability: classical, empirical, subjective. First one was classical. There's a definition, and it involved equally likely. There is a formula. And I remember us doing these in class and some problems. I'll show you which ones, but right now I'm trying to balance pointing out vocabulary and showing you some examples to go with it. So I would memorize the vocabulary and I would memorize how to do the examples. Together it'll help you see everything conceptually, and that's going to help on the memory. Equally likely, but here we go on the probability of an event happening. It was the number of outcomes over the number in the sample space. I'm going on over to page 199 that ended up with some probability rules. And we played around with these in class. I would refamiliarize yourself, maybe put those on a flashcard, the probability rules, but then go over one more thing. I am at page 201. I made us a note that this is wrong in the ebook. But looking here, the rule for complementary. Again, trying to balance vocabulary with some problems. So now I'm pointing out a problem. You need to know how to do at the bottom of page 201. Example 411 on this victims of violence. What does that look like? And you can tell it's got the complementary information in there. We also talked about empirical probability. And we had a formula for empirical. I'd like you to know how to do example 413. I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff, and in fact, I'm going on to section 4-2, and I'm at the top of page 211. On your formula card, we were kind of silly in class about these addition rules and multiplication rules. Pull out those notes, go back at your book. What were we talking about in class? But notice some things I've highlighted in green here, but disregard the green on example 417. Disregard the mammal, fish, birds, and go down here to 418. That's the one I want you to know for the test. And I know I'm going pretty quick, so what you may want to do is just first get you a green highlighter and go through your book or your ebook. You can highlight on your ebook and just see what I'm telling you and also see what I'm not telling you. I'm skipping over a lot, but I'm at the middle of page 212. The probability rules can be extended. That's good to know. There's also an addition rule, too. But on page 213, the problem I want you to know is 4-21. Again, this whole video is what is very likely to be seen on our test. I'm already at page 221. You need to note that there's a thing called independent events. Again, we got to talk about this in class in the multiplication rule. And here are a couple of problems you need to know for the test. 4-23 and 4-24. And I'm moving on to page 223, and I'm at the bottom of 223. Let me move my document camera. And at the bottom, it's at multiplication rule 2. I learn well with index cards. You got to figure out if you're going to write a bunch of stuff down, how are you going to memorize, how are you going to sort all of this out in your mind. I'm now on page 224 showing you an example, drawing cards, but specifically I'm showing you the ones that we did in class. Could you do this problem for part A and part C? I'm moving on to 226. On 226, there is a formula for the conditional. The probability that B is going to happen given that A already did, it's the probability of the A and the B over the probability of the A. So an example I'd like you to do for that is at the bottom of page 227, example 4-34. We did it in class, but again, trying to narrow down everything in these 3 chapters down to just some. So I'm at the bottom of 228, and this probabilities for at least. I remember having a cow in class and saying, oh, it's going to be hard. And you all looked at me like, could you put like 20 of these on the test? So on page 229, there's an example 4-36. I would know how to do 4-36. I'm now on page 234. At the bottom of the page, you notice it's not in green, but the title says Counting Rules. And if you go to the top of the next page, which is 235, I have in green the fundamental counting rule. And I have an example at the bottom of the page. Could you do example 4-39? There's information about permutations, a lot of stuff to look at, but I'd like to boil it down to page 238, right here to permutation rule 1. And I'd like to point out the example that goes with it at the top of 239. Can you do example 4-44? At the bottom of that page, there's another permutation rule. On page 241, there's a combination rule. And there's example 4-48 at the bottom of the page. I'm trying to show you, narrow down information for you to prepare for our test 2. When we did 4-5 in class, I split you into groups and there was great angst, but there was much conversation. At this point, I'd like to say, if you go in D2L, you can see everybody who is in our class. If you go over to, I think it's communication, and then on class list. You really need to pull all your resources together for our last few weeks together. You might want to click on the whole list and invite everyone to talk to. You may want to click on certain people to form small groups. I was really pushing you in class to form like GroupMe class, to use GroupMe and put together some groups. Really use your resources. Don't hold back. I am not asking questions on 4-5 on this test. I am moving on over to Chapter 5. And on Chapter 5, I am scooting to page 267. On 267, you see how I have green and green marked out. So covering up green marked out, you need to be familiar with a discrete probability distribution. You need to know the vocabulary. What I need you to know how to work for the test is on page 269, the 2 requirements for the probability distribution. And then I need you to know how to do 5-4. We did this in class. You actually did it with a neighbor. I'm moving on to page 273 at the top of that page. You'll see the mean, variance, and standard deviation. That was like, oh, we're familiar with those. Oh, wait, there's this new one called expectation. That's what we covered in class. And at the bottom of the page, you notice I've got in green the formula for the mean. The formula for the mean. The formula for the mean. Don't forget you have a formula card. You will be able to use the formula card during the test. But I'm expecting that you will treat it just like we did in class, where you don't write a whole lot of extra stuff, except where I've mentioned where to write stuff on the formula card. I'm on page 275. And on 275, can you do example 5-8? At the bottom of 275, here's a formula for the variance. We did a lot of these in class. We moaned and groaned, but we did them, and you can do them. I can't give you huge stuff on the test. I wouldn't do that. But you need to know how to do the basic concept of how do you find that the variance and the standard deviation. I'm moving on to page 277. I had crossed it out in class, only if we have time. I'm now asking you to know how to do 511. It's very well described. And then at the bottom of the page, an expected value. And the darndest thing happened on expected value. At the top of the next page, 278, it said, wait, what? The expected value is the mean. Notice I'm not highlighting in green any of the problems on 278 or 279. I will point out, if you didn't already, on your formula card, we're in Chapter 5, and by the way, I did label the test. I labeled the test when you're working problems in Chapter 4, and then you can see where you're working problems in Chapter 5. That should help with the flow and you deciphering which problems or formulas to use. But right here, you see the problems that we were just talking about. An expected value is this, and you might want to extend it to say, oh yeah, that's also what we call the mean. You might want to write that down on your formula card. So I'm scooching on to page 283. Remember, you can start and stop this video at any point. If you feel rushed, stop it, get caught up, and start the video again. You need to know a binomial experiment, and what in the world does that mean? At the top of the next page, 284, I have highlighted an example, 5-15, specifically CDE. It's what we did in class. I'll remind you at the bottom of that page some notation, because at the top of the next page on 285, there is a formula. Again, make sure that when you're looking, we're in Chapter 5, so when you look over here at Chapter 5, is that formula on this card? And you'll notice right here, it is. You might double check that it's correct. That probably already happened in class, but it never hurts. I'm looking at page 286, and you see on 286, I have highlighted example 5-17. I'm now on page 288, and I'm looking at a green part for mean, variance, standard deviation of the binomial distribution part. And if you go back here, you have the mean for binomial distribution, the variance and the standard deviation for the binomial distribution. It's laid out on your card. I've told y'all to write on the card, but just be real careful that whatever you write has a whole lot of intentional meaning and not just kind of arrows or gibberish. You are marking on that card with purpose. And on page 289, I'm at the bottom at 5-24. You need to know how to do an example like that, where it has the mean, the variance, and the standard deviation. And I tried to pick well. I tried to pick well with what's on the test, like if it's involving fractions or percentages or decimals. I tried to parallel it, not perfectly, but the best that I could with what's in our book. And also just relying on your critical thinking and problem-solving skills to be able to put the rest of the pieces together. So now we're at Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is our first not face-to-face part. So you've been working through it. I don't know what order you want to do, but I'm giving you a suggested order in our assignments. But what can we expect out of Chapter 6 on the test? And look with me at page 305. Here is a definition. Again, balancing what you're memorizing and with what you're putting into practice. I'm on page 306, a summary. You need to be very familiar with those, if not memorize the concept of all of these. At the bottom of that page, I need you to make sure you know these three numbers: 1 standard deviation both sides, 2 standard deviations, and 3 and their respective percentages. In the video on page 307, I threw in a problem that wasn't in the book. Well, there's a problem like that on our test. So here's what I was reading to you in class. You might want to take a screenshot. You might want to take a snippet, which is a screenshot, or take a picture with your phone. But there is going to be a problem like that on the test. At the bottom of 307, what in the world is standard normal distribution? Standard meaning zeros in the middle. And then we get this formula on page 308, and we're smiling because, oh, it feels so comfortable. We like it, but it's standard. And on page 309, can you do an example like 6-1? On page 311, can you do an example like 6-4A and C? I'm moving on to section 6-2, where I want you to look at the top of 321. And at the top of 321, do you know this process? And do you know that you're going to get points for drawing, and you will lose points for not drawing a sketch? Can you do example 6-6? At the top of 322, can you do example 6-7? Again, these were two that you had videos. We haven't gone through them together as part of our online learning environment. 324, there is a formula. But the formula's on this page. Or if it's not, you put it there. The top of 325, can you do 6-9? At the top of 326, can you do 6-10? I'm moving on to our last section for the test, the central limit theorem section. And on the central limit theorem section, I didn't mark them. And so now I'm going to go ahead and hit pause and double check these. So looking at the top of 339, the last things to know for our test, can you do example 6-13? At the top of 340, can you do example 6-14? And then on 341, can you do example 6-15, but both parts? Could you notice if it's individual or if it's using the mean? And that concludes everything. And I know it's a lot, but instead of just saying, hey, go study chapters 4, 5, and 6, we have now narrowed it down, and you should go mark those and be prepared with those. Again, I'll be sending you more details on what to do to prepare for our test in our stats class.